got Gary with me, Chief Creative Officer for Nuance. I've got Jeff, who has created an amazing wearable product called Basis Points. First question that needs to really come out is everyone is talking about wearables now. This is not a new thing, right? I mean, it's been around for quite a while, and glass is out. What's been missing to really kind of push this product out in the market and get everybody excited?
Glass?
Not just glass, but wearables.
Well, to your point, I think wearables have been around for a while. I remember talking with Hossein Rahman over at Jawbone, gosh, must have been about 2007, and that was sort of one of the really early products was the Jawbone, was the earpiece, you know. And at the time, they were working on technology, but they also realizations that people were actually going to wear these things. And what did I look like wearing it? It may sound kind of silly and superficial, but it's actually true. What do I actually look like, and what is the functionality? What is the trade-offs of me wearing this all day?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think when it comes to wearable technology, how it looks is fundamentally important. So I think two things have happened recently that have created this wave of wearables that everyone's paying attention to now. I think we're starting to see devices that people want to wear from a style standpoint, from a status symbol standpoint. What does it say about me as a user and what I care about? So I think we're starting to see some of that. I think we've still got, as a category, ways to go. And I think the other thing that we've seen in the last really 2 years is a dramatic shift in what sensors cost, the kinds of sensors that you can build into wearable technology, which drives the amount of insight that you can get out of wearable technology and therefore makes it valuable enough to wear. Combined with the proliferation of cloud computing to make all of this, really smart and sophisticated. So I think those are the big trends that we've seen change that suddenly wearables.
I think your point about cloud computing is a big one, because I think with the advent of intelligent cloud-based systems, now there's an endpoint for all this data that you're collecting, all this functionality that you want to invoke. There's actually a place to do it now. So these intelligent systems, things like Siri and Google Now and Redg Mobile Assistant, the ability to take these wearable devices and I sort of break it down into two types of functionality. One is the sensor side of it, in which you've got these devices that are actually accruing information about my daily activities. And whether that's geo, time of day kinds of stuff, or whether it's healthcare and bio kind of stuff, or it's acoustic stuff, or whatever it happens to be, all that stuff gets into the cloud. Then the other part of it, I think, is the way we interact. So things like speech and touch and gesture and haptics and all these kinds of things. The ability to interact with that technology that resides in the cloud. I think it's all starting to come together now.
So then, are you saying that basically speech, haptics, all this stuff is really the platform, and everything else is more like a metaphor of that platform? Is that kind of just where you would go with that, or?
Well, I think it's still really early in the evolution of where all this stuff is going. I think about this from both the macro perspective and the micro perspective. Nuance does a lot of work in the car space, and basically car it wears me, right? I'm in this environment and I'm living and breathing in this environment. All the way down to the micro. My daughter is doing her PhD in biomedical engineering, and she's working a lot in synthetic biology. The idea that some of these wearables are going to be worn inside of us, and over the next 5, 10, 15 years, they'll get smaller and they'll have more intimate information about us and the ability to operate with this stuff in the cloud, both individually and through healthcare facilities, etc. So yeah, I think this is the cloud itself is a platform, and the speech and the haptics, all that stuff. It's a way of interacting.
Yeah. So with every major trend, that there always arises a dominant player in technology. The iPhone definitely was dominant for a while. I think all the way back to the Atari, right? When it really pushed the gaming console. Is Google Glass going to be that dominant player? What is the dominant player that really pushes this market? Jeff, you're in the mix.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have seen sort of iconic products emerge that makes the category. Smartphones arguably were made by the iPhone. iPads arguably made the tablets market. I was just reading a story, I think it was Reuters, who proffered that we are at the Palm Pilot stage of wearables. Analyze it as you like. I think I'll recast the question, because I think when you look at something like what Basis is doing with a sort of watch form factor, sensor, health-oriented device, compared to what Google is doing with Google Glass, the difference between those things is much greater than the difference between the iPhone and the iPad. So I'm not sure there will be an iconic product that suddenly makes wearables. There may be an iconic product that makes health wearables, an iconic product that makes infotainment wearables, an iconic product that makes medical or embedded wearables. Because I think we're looking at a really, really diverse market here.
Yep.
Each of those segments begging for the thing that makes that segment as opposed to the thing that makes wearables at large.
Yeah, and the thing that you're talking about might actually exist in the cloud itself. And these are all just sensors to interact and to send data back and forth. I mean, at Nuance, when we talk about speech and we talk about things like watches and the thing that Jeff is building, I mean, the old metaphor, if you're old enough, is sort of Dick Tracy, right? You speak to the watch, and there are rumors that, all different kinds of companies out there are coming out with watches that are going to interact with these intelligent systems. And so we think about that. And as far as glass, I was over in Munich a few weeks ago, and I had a Google Glass with me, and I thought I'd go to an art museum, and I couldn't help myself, but I had to wear my glass into the museum. And you could see it as I'm walking around, and it looks kind of cyborgish, and all the people in the museum, they weren't quite sure what I was doing or why I was wearing this thing, and you could see some of the folks working there huddling off to the side and whispering and looking at me and this kind of a thing. So something like Google Glass, it's so iconic in its appearance that I think it's very much like portable cameras in the late 19th century, right? It was sort of like you go around taking pictures of people, it's like, wow. It's kind of a technology that's sort of startling, and it makes you think about what is my position vis-a-vis the technology.
I was reading that the first Kodak camera was actually banned from beaches, which is fascinating. But
Wow.
one of the things that I like about wearable technology in the space in general, and is that it is to me a metaphor that I believe that all technology is meant to kind of draw us together as human beings. That's why the event social is really push it to the limit. That's why that's honestly why I started this labs thing. What I really want to know is it just faster GPUs, CPUs that pushes this forward? Like, what is it that creates that enhanced user experience so that 3, 4, 5 years from now, we're not doing this ridiculous thing all the time when we're hanging out with our friends, checking everything? And how do we integrate that? I mean, what's the holdup? Give it to me now.
Well, I think there's two things that will shape maybe the relevance over time. I think one is what kind of information can we gather and what kind of action does that create in our case, the consumer's life. And we have a particular take on that. And I think the second part is how you interact with all of this data in ever easier ways, especially for devices that have less of what we would consider a classic display, which I think gets us to voice navigation and interaction in those ways. I think in terms of the first part of the answer, what makes these devices, I think, explode, what makes them desirable, what makes them wearable every day, what makes them really a part of the fabric of our lives is it getting really relevant data. And part of that comes from the sensors, part of it comes from sort of contextual information that we can layer on to the sensors. But more importantly, what we've seen over and over and over again with all the devices in this space is this step from sensor tracking to display of the data in charts and graphs. And what we have seen from users is that's sort of really interesting at sort of the novelty level for a week or 2 or 3 or maybe even more than that. But at some point it wears off and the consumer is left with the question, now what? What do I do about all this data? Great, I can track my steps or whatever it is that I'm interested in for a few weeks, but what do I do about that? And I think the thing about wearables that we now have the opportunity to do, but is really a UX question as opposed to a wearable technology question, is how do you turn all that data into action? How do you go from charts and graphs to this is what you can do about it, this is how you change your life in small steps, this is how we attack behavior change based on data. And that's, I think, brand new to the wearable space. I think that's something that this category largely has skirted up until now. But I think that's what makes it relevant to everyday people every day of their life.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to what Jeff is saying. You can collect all the information that you want and put it in the cloud somewhere. I can, if I get good geo information, it's not about the fact that I was in the mall. It's that I arrived at this store at this time. I was here for this amount of time, and I went and I did this. Or the bio information, whether it's sleep information, fertility information, workout information, you can collect all this data in the cloud that you want, but at the end of the day, what are you going to do with it? Can you create systems that are intelligent enough to start drawing inferences, to start finding things in the data that you didn't actually realize? Is a system smart enough to know that if I had my 3rd cup of coffee or 4th cup of coffee after 3 o'clock, I have trouble sleeping at night? Are there systems intelligent enough to move from a virtual, to the virtual assistant to a virtual advisor, to actually use this data, to harness it in ways that right now we're just not using?
I totally dig it. So back to the question that's on everybody's mind is, where is the money at? Right? I mean, we're still, you read that Android is still working really hard to monetize their platform. The iPhone seems to have gotten it to move forward. I mean, is it the iWatch that ends up making all the money again and moving forward? Like, where's the long-term and short-term revenue? Short-term initially, because I think we've got, but that's the most important. But where is that going to be? Because in the revenue is where the larger corporations start to really push forward with these type of products. So where is it going to be?
Well, I think everybody knows it's initially going to be advertising, but just sort of blanketly throwing ads out there is kind of pointless. It gets in the way and actually creates a sort of a suboptimal experience. But if you can start collecting this information and learning something more about me and market to me as a service, really offer value, contextually relevant kinds of things, I think there's a real upside there. And if you do it in the right way, if you can integrate it into the experience seamlessly enough, it becomes becomes helpful. And I think that's really where the money's going to start coming in.
I think the answer depends on the business, really. So for instance, for us, the initial revenue stream is not advertising. It's very simple. It's the device sale. It's one of the beauties of being a hardware product, at least in part. Our solution is a hardware product. Consumers are used to putting down their hard-earned money and walking out of the store or the virtual store with a good. And I think what we're seeing in the wearable space right now is most of the monetization is driven off of the device sale. The question is, what's behind that makes the business model even more interesting than just being another box at $199 or $99 or whatever the price is. So I think you're right that there has to be revenue in the short term, otherwise we don't get to the long term. But I think what we're going to see over the course of the next couple of years is the monetization mix will fragment. It'll be partly device sales. It'll be partly sort of service sales. Some of that service sales may come in the form of advertising, sort of a subsidized service mode. Some of it will come in the classic Silicon Valley form of premium or freemium models, in which you get some amount of service for free, and then you upgrade yourself to more premium analytics or more premium insights. I think those are the higher margin pot of gold that's in the medium to longer term.
So, this is interesting, side note. Maybe eventually we'll change mobile beat to wearable beat or something like that, because it just seems like mobility and wearables are so combined, and so wearable beat sounds horrible. So when do we actually see this transition where wearables, we talked about the layered approach, maybe you want to dive into that a little bit, where we actually see people not necessarily, their phones are not important anymore because there's this ambient computing that's always evolving around us. We just interact with whatever this thing is. Maybe it's a fingernail, I don't know, right? When do we actually see that transition? Is it 2 years from now, 5 years from now, never?
It may be a rearview mirror thing where you all of a sudden you realize, well, hey, I don't really need my phone anymore, and I haven't needed it for a year or so, but I don't see that in the short term. I see the need for coalescing a lot of the input modalities to have it in a single source. I don't expect to be able to just walk around and do everything I need with a watch or with a glass. I think that there's going to be something with a little bit more local power required, at least for the next few years. But again, most of the heavy lifting will be done in the cloud. And until there's ubiquitous Wi-Fi at super high speeds and sensors that can incorporate radios, high speed, powerful radios and wristwatches and glasses and everything else. When that day comes, then we can talk about the disappearance of the phone.
Yeah, I actually think, despite the coming proliferation of wearable technology, I actually think the phone, and let's use this term loosely, right, because the definition of the phone may change a bit over the next few years, but I think the phone is actually becoming more central and more important. It's true that all the magic, really, at the end of the day, is in the cloud. That's where all of our data goes, that's where all of the sort of high-end processing and fancy math, the algorithms that we run, happens. It all happens there, but the way it gets there is via the mobile. The way the consumer will digest and interact and make use out of that data will be mobile. And that's really important because as we think about wearable technology, there's a few really practical factors that will help shape its evolution and its adoption. One of them is battery life. In fact, your friend at Jawbone was just talking about the importance of battery life as really a fundamental factor in wearable technology, having batteries that last for days to the point where you don't need to worry about it as much. You're not charging the devices every day like you do your smartphone. But battery life has a lot to do with form factor, with size, with weight, but it also
Capability.
it also has to do with capability. The more processing you put in the local device, the more battery power you're going to use, the more wireless connectivity you build into the local device, particularly if we're talking about wide area connectivity like 3G or GPS or any of those things. Suddenly it has a massive impact on both battery life and form factor and cost. All three factors work against the proliferation of wearables. So I think what we're going to see is the proliferation of discrete, both in form factor and maybe in wearability, devices that are intentionally meant to leverage the stronger horsepower of first the mobile platform and then the cloud for the sake of optimizing around these factors that are limiting in the proliferation of wearables.
So we're in the yellow now. Famous last words for anyone thinking about the space, entrepreneurs, or just in general.
Now's the time. Now's the time. I think that it's interesting, get the technology out there, start building it into the cloud, start building the roads to get there. We're very, very lucky to be working in this technology at this time. We're seeing it from its infancy, and it's really accelerating rapidly.
Yeah, I agree. Now is the time. I guess, as we think about this space and we think about what large corporations should be thinking about this space as well as entrepreneurs, I have a very practical lens on this space. The wearable space is going to be huge. There are many magical things that we will do over time, leveraging sensors in the cloud and the rest. But we've got to start, particularly in the consumer space, we've got to start with concrete use cases, stuff that's really relevant to the actual user, the mainstream user. Something that starts not with the idea of, hey, we're building a health platform, something that starts with the idea of, here's a product and it does X for your life, and give them a way to imagine that in their day-to-day life. I think we, particularly here in the Valley, we tend to get trapped in sort of the heady future, and we forget to think that, particularly again in the consumer space, which is really where wearables is today, 60% of it I think today is health and fitness devices, so there's a use case, but we have to start with a concrete use case that then may lead, upon its adoption, may lead to an ever-growing platform in the consumer's life. But the consumer's looking for a platform. They're looking for solutions to real-life problems, and I think we have to start with that.
All right, well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys were informed. Entrepreneurs here, now's the time, call me. Anyways, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Reg.